Everyone loves to say wrestling's so fake. I've never used the word fake. Now, is it predetermined? Sure. I'm not going to deny that. But people don't understand when I say, oh, my insides hurt, like my organs are bruised. They have no concept. They can't rationalize what I'm even mean. You take years and years of just taking, it's just a flat bat bump, just something simple. It's like being in a car accident every single time. Body's not meant to do that. So yeah, it takes a toll on you.
Hi, everybody, and it's time for another episode of the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast. We thank you so much for joining us all across social media, whether you're finding us on YouTube or on Spotify. Wherever you find your podcast, folks, we are there. And don't forget, like, share, subscribe. As they used to say, somebody call somebody. Run up the street and tell your mama. I'm Kevin Kelly. We welcome you to the show, along with the tremendously popular, getting to be well-known all throughout the internet wrestling world, Casey Thompson. My goodness, it's taken off like a rocket ship here the last couple weeks, sir.
It's like as planned. We're talking about stuff that people haven't heard, so it's all new to them. So there's a little buzz going around, different things. Vader is always a hot topic,
right?
So either they loved him or hate him, and it seems like more people hated him.
More people needed to see him after he was neutered. I was talking with Bob Cook on Facebook about this. More people needed to see Vader after he had been neutered by Paul Orndorff because he was a humbled Vader. Maybe you had something to do with that as well, my boy, because everybody is talking about the fact that Casey Thompson, after getting bludgeoned and beaten by Vader, putting him over in the ring, gets back in his face and says, hey, man, you need to learn how to work, which in the wrestling industry, that's never something you want to say. That's like
that's
calling,
an insult.
Yeah, that's like saying something about your mom. That's like saying something bad. You need to learn how to work because that's an indictment of you, your trainer, your trainer's trainer, right?
Right. To me, get physical within the back. Would I've got my butt kicked? Who knows? I could handle myself. But I think it was more effective by words. I think it made more of an impact on him by me telling him he needs to learn how to work.
So telling him that he needed to learn how to work, obviously that had a tremendous effect back then as it sent waves throughout the wrestling industry. And now everybody's talking about it all these years later. We've spent some time here on the show fondly talking about Sid. And I wanted to, a thought crossed my mind when I was thinking about Sid was that horrific injury that Sid suffered in 1998 on a WCW pay-per-view. It was, and I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that story, but I wanted to ask you, Casey, about injuries. And of course, you had a long in-ring career. You spent a lot of years in wrestling competition, but eventually you bowed out, and you did so at a relatively young age. Was that injury related? Tell me about what kind of led to you stepping away from the ring.
My son was born, and I had to go out of the country like 2 days later. And everyone there was like, man, what's going on? You're like miserable. You're killing us in the ring. You're no fun to be around. And I'm like, you know what? I just don't want to do it no more. I've seen the effect of the guys who've been on the road and trying to be a father. They don't correlate very well together. And I didn't want that. When I decided I was going to be a father, I was going to be a hands-on father. And I was for both of my kids. So I came back and I said, my wife at the time, I said, you know what? I'm done. She said, what do you mean? I said, I'm done. I'm over it. And so that's what I did. Now, I did get back into it. Like you say, no one ever retires. I wrestled a couple matches here or there. I wrestled a local show against Jake the Snake Roberts. Actually knocked his teeth out. His false teeth.
Wait a minute now.
a little tater. And then as when we brought you down, we started the promotion MXPW. Did talking about time-wise, I wasn't traveling, but producing a television show, it's like an endless 60, 70-hour-a-week thing. So I did that for 2 years, and I was glad to be done with that. It was just a one-man working crew doing everything. It was good. We had a lot of fun, had a lot of great matches, a lot of great talent come through MXPW down here in Florida, from Dusty to Barry to Raven. D'Lo was a partner at the beginning, and he jumped out real fast. And so it left everything on me. So we just restructured everything and just emphasized on some good local talent and local, independent guys, and then sprinkled in a little bit of guys that are on TV, some stars, to do it the right way to uplift the young guys. It was good. But going back to the injury thing, yeah, I've had a few injuries, but that's not why I quit wrestling.
It's a joke with all old-timer wrestling. Hey, I got hit in the head a lot. I forgot a lot of things.
Oh my gosh.
Listen, concussions are a reality. Every time you take a flat back bump, it's the equivalent of a 35-mile-an-hour car crash.
Man, I was in a lot of car crashes. Unfortunately, my tag team partner, took a really crappy bump, 1 foot in the ground like concrete. So I was the Ricky Morton of the tag team. I always took the heat. I was taking all the bumps, selling for everyone.
In terms of Sid's injuries and Sid's most famous injury, of course, it is available on YouTube, and I'm sure we'll have a link for it in the description. It wasn't Sid's idea to jump off the top rope and land on one leg and give the big boot off the top rope. That was not Sid's idea. That was the idea of
John Laurinaitis, Johnny Ace.
He was the booker at the time, or at least the finish guy.
Yeah, they brought him in to be a finish guy. Still, I scratch my head over it.
John, I know him personally. You know him personally. Florida guy as well, along with his brother Mark. I maintain that, and this isn't a personal knock against Johnny. And, of course, John Laurinaitis' name is in the news. When we talked about Vince, his name is in the news along with Vince. And I'm not talking about any of that because I never saw any of that behavior. All I'm talking about is the fact that, in my opinion, John Laurinaitis was the worst general manager of any professional sports franchise in history on any sport, on any level. Because of the number of people that were hired and fired, nobody got over, and business tanked. Now, you could lay the blame at the feet of Vince, or you could lay the blame at the feet of Johnny or whomever. But nevertheless, when you're responsible for buying the groceries and the meal turns out lousy, it's on you. And he stunk at his job. John Laurinaitis comes up with this brilliant idea, finish guy, by the way, comes up with this brilliant finish where Sid's going to leap off the top rope and land on one leg. Now, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physicist, Casey. Can you imagine the force of a 280-pound man coming down and landing on one leg from 6 feet in the air?
What boggles me is Sid had no problem telling them no. So I don't know why he said, no, I'm not going to do that.
To have been there for that conversation would have been interesting. And I would imagine that there was probably a lot of negotiation, a lot of bartering. But nevertheless, the damage was done. Was that the worst injury you've ever seen in the ring, or have you seen worse?
No, I've seen people's necks get broke. So, I mean, a compound fracture, it's pretty brutal, gory to see, and you can see it in the video.
Yeah, please. If you haven't seen it, just want to warn you, it's
don't eat before.
Awful. Don't eat before, and, again, be like this, because I can't look at it.
You know what's really strange? I spent all these years wrestling, taking these crazy bumps from 30 foot above the ring. I mean, you name it, I've done it, right? I sit there and watch TV now, and I watch stuff, and I see something, and I feel it from all the way inside, like a tingle going through my whole body. I've done stuff a million times worse than that. Everything affects me, and I'm like, ooh, how can they do that? Why would they do that?
One that gets me is when Darby Allin does the coffin drop on the edge of the ring. It's falling backwards and taking a flat back bump, but you're taking it like on the edge of the ring. And it just, you can feel all the wind go out of him. His soul leaves his body, and it just...
That's the hardest part of the ring, too.
That's the hardest part of the ring. Yeah,
and they're not using the best ring up there. They don't.
No. AEW has a really, really good ring. And, again, it was Cody Rhodes who, and we'll get into Cody because I could spend days, weeks, months just talking about Cody Rhodes.
Mm-hmm.
That was his design. And he had that ring designed to model the New Japan ring, which is very well respected in terms of a good working ring, and I've never heard complaints about the ring. But yeah, if it's a cheaper, low quality ring, then no, the AEW ring is good.
People always talk about the WCW ring, how WWF was so much harder, and I didn't get that. WCW was the hardest ring I was ever in.
It's a wood ring. Now the WWF ring that you bumped in, when you were doing a lot of enhancement work was the old school Andre big man ring that the company had used for decades, that model
Yeah.
where it had no give. And you say that that ring was a better bump than the WCW ring, which some people said was like a trampoline.
Oh my God, what are they talking about? It's a wooden WWE when I went there, it was a steel ring and they had plywood, but it was fiberglass or it wouldn't break. WCW was a wooden ring. That's why when you can hear this sound, the sound effect of a WCW bump is like, man, that sounds really like hard hitting, right? You ever just listen to the matches and just listen. Don't listen to the commentaries. Just listen to the bumps. You can tell the difference from a wood ring into a metal ring, a steel ring.
Right.
So then they had it was wood. Then they had like planks, like 2x12s, or it goes from 2x10s, 2x12s, or 1x6s, some whatever they use for the platform. Then they put an actual wrestling mat on top of it, a 1-inch wrestling mat, which is not cushy. It's solid. So when you took a bump, it was like, man. And then when the Big Show or Paul White got up there, they changed the ropes from 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch cable, which made it like you could hit that thing as hard as you wanted, and it was hard to move those ropes. So it made it even hurt worse.
And when you would even hit the ropes, I know this is true for trainees, and I've done it, because I've jumped in the ring a couple times here or there, just horsing around and go hit the ropes, and then I wake up the next day and I've got welts on
Bruises.
the side. Yeah, bruised. Your body just gets used to that, correct?
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
you get conditioned to it. So, but if you haven't been in for a little while and you go back, you have bruises like going all the way across your back, all at least two of the ropes,
Good
because
Lord.
when you hit them, you want to hook it and then you want to sit down into it, because you want to make it. The people are looking up at you, so it's all perception, making things look bigger than they are. So you sit into it, lay into it, and it propels you off and everything. I mean, it's a true art to really hit the ropes. You can tell if someone knows how to work in 2 seconds by how they hit the ropes, how many
I know
steps they
Doctor.
take across the ring.
Of course, our good friend, legendary trainer Dr. Tom Pritchard, always preaches that hook and sit because his thing is, and he sees so many guys now today, they just go flat back against that top rope. And Tom says to them, "What happens if the
Break the
top rope
neck.
breaks? They would tumble out and fall on their head. If the top rope broke under this scenario, you at least have a fighting chance. You may
Yeah,
not even
I
fall out
always
of the
hooked
ring."
it with one, and then I had my other hand down at the bottom. I called it my safety valve. So if that was going to break, I'm hooking the top, and I have a safety valve for the second rope. And trust me,
Mm-hmm.
I have broken some ropes before where I have ended up in the third or fourth row. I was just going into the ring. We were over in South America once, and I was just going to hit the ropes just a couple times just to get a feel of the ring. And it was a ring that was a little higher off the ground. I would hit the rings hard and the ropes hard. I hit it, and I heard crack, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm going down. So I just naturally protected myself, tucked and rolled, and the ropes were underneath me. And I looked up, and this particular pole was welded at the base, and it was coming at me too. So I'm rolling
Oh.
out of the way. So they had to re-weld it. And we talked about Dr. Tom and Lance Storm would have these arguments about calling it in the ring or just memorizing everything,
Yeah,
right?
that was a conversation that we had off the air, and it was a philosophical debate about call it in the ring versus memorize the match. And Tom, being a little more old school, was a
Mm-hmm.
believer in you need to learn how to call it in the ring, and Lance was let's focus on teaching them memorization. Let's teach them on how to memorize a match because that's what they're going to. And these were guys in OVW. These were not beginning students. So these were
All right, well,
guys that
let
were
me
getting
throw a
ready
little
to go to
message out there
TV.
to Lance Storm. So, Lance, I'm in South America. I hit the ropes before. The pole breaks. So now they had to re-weld it before the show starts. And they said no rope work at all, the whole tour, because the poles broke. Everyone's freaking out. Lita was on the tour before she made it big in there. I mean, they had a bunch of people, and I'm like, just call it in the ring. And everyone was like, didn't know what to do. I said, just call it in the ring. You can do spots, just chain wrestle. You're going to really find out who knows how to wrestle now on this tour. And there was a lot of people that were freaked out that had a hard time getting through it because they're used to calling everything in the back and just going off the fly. But when you're in a house show, there's crowd reactions and you want to change stuff sometimes on the fly to adapt to what the surroundings in your environment is. I would always set up my matches. We talk about a opening in the middle, a cutoff or whatever, take it home for the finish and everything. A couple false comebacks, false finishes. And then we designed it, we call it out to be a roller coaster. So it's like a wrestling match should be like watching a roller coaster, and that's a lot missing today. Going out there doing first match 500 daredevil moves and a million high spots and no selling nothing. So where are you supposed to go from there? You're supposed to
Yeah.
build up. So I call it as a roller, going up and you go down and zig and zag, and that's how I always did it, and it seemed to always work out well to me.
I spend a lot of time on YouTube watching old wrestling. Newer wrestling doesn't speak to me as much as the older stuff did. And I watched a clip this week. It was actually the whole match. It was from October of 1982, Championship Wrestling from Florida, and it was the finals of the Les Welch Florida Heavyweight Title Tournament with Barry Windham versus Kevin Sullivan. And they gave the whole hour of TV to this match. They didn't start with the open, the setup of it, but I remember watching it. We're giving the whole hour of TV to this match, and of course, it was wrestling. It was Call It in the Ring, and it was Kevin Sullivan's heel turn. And it was the beginnings of Kevin Sullivan transforming into the demonic character that he became. But at this time, Kevin was a, Northeast Boston babyface, and he was a hard-hitting guy and could go. So he and Barry Windham, they didn't call very much at all. You could tell because it was a lot of chain wrestling, and some of it wasn't perfect, but it was the struggle. Barry early goes for a crossbody. Kevin thought he was going to dive one way. Barry dove the other way, but Kevin kind of caught him, and they fell together into a struggle 1-2 kick out. So we thought we were going to have an ending 30 seconds in. They started hot, and then they slowed down. And then they would pick up the pace, and then they would slow down. And then Kevin took a bump out to the floor, and he injured his knee, and Barry gives him the time to get back in. And then Sullivan comes back in. Barry gets the applause for sportsmanship, and they continue to wrestle. And it leads to the finish, which if you haven't seen it and you want to go out and see it on YouTube, maybe we'll link it here, you can watch the match, and I won't spoil it for you. But it was called in the ring the whole time except for a couple of things, a couple of spots and the finish. Yeah. And that was it. It was
Barry
beautiful.
was such a great worker, too.
Oh, my God.
He was such underrated.
At this point, 1982, of course, he's just a couple of years into his career. He was great at selling and being flexible. And his body and the way Sullivan would try to pin him and he backslide. 1-2, Barry gets a shoulder up, and then Sullivan brings both of his arms together. And Barry is still able to get a shoulder up, and he keeps trying the hold, and Barry keeps getting that shoulder up. I'm watching this, and I've already seen it, and I'm feeling the tension. And oh, by the way, Jake Roberts is watching the match from the outside of the ring like this. They get a shot of him. And then later on, Jim Garvin is watching the match like this. Both guys had been eliminated earlier in the tournament. Both were heels at the time. The tension is built because you're expecting a run-in. You're expecting something to happen, but it never happens. It was just amazing. It was like a movie. Yeah, and I'll tell you what, that was Dusty. Dusty was the booker back then, and it was a Dusty Rhodes cinematic production. As cinematic as TV studio wrestling could be in 1982, this had everything. It was beautiful. Wow. What an episode of television, which then set up the move forward. And so this is October, and then Christmas Day night, 1982, Jake Roberts dresses as Santa Claus with Sullivan and Dusty in the cage, loser leave. Magically, you find out that Santa Claus happens to be Jake Roberts. He gives a gimmick to Kevin Sullivan, some sort of electrical device. I don't know what this was, but it was in Sullivan's hand. It was probably nothing, the donut hole. And he does something where he gives Dusty this in the neck, and Dusty goes down selling like he's been electrocuted. 1, 2, 3, Dusty Rhodes loses. He leaves the state of Florida for 90 days. And then a few weeks later, coming out of the fire and the darkness in West Texas is the Midnight Rider. So that's how this all... But it was so beautiful. We began this story kind of talking about injuries. Besides concussions, what are some of the injuries that you suffered?
I've broken both my wrists twice, all my fingers, my nose probably 10 or 11 times. I got thrown over the top rope, and the way I landed, my elbow was on my knee and hit here and dislocated my jaw. It was way over here. And the guy's like, hold still, and popped it back in. I've been totally knocked out in the ring, and a guy went to I was bent over, he went to take a bump, he kicked me right in the temple, and that was actually Big Tilly.
Oh my God.
Right in the temple, and before I thought I blew out my knee, and I tore my teardrop muscle off the bone. It rolled up and everything, and that was a couple weeks before I had an overseas tour. And I got off the plane with crutches and a mobilizer, and the promoter looked at me. I said, "Don't worry, just get me to a pharmacy. I'll be fine." And made it through the whole tour, no problem and everything. But yeah, I meant back, hips, you name it. I mean, now to the day, everyone loves to say wrestling's so fake. I've never used the word fake. Now, is it predetermined? Sure. I'm not going to deny that. But fake, I meant, people don't understand when I say, oh, it feels like my insides hurt, like my organs are bruised. And they're like, they have no concept. They can't rationalize what I'm even mean. But you take years and years of just taking just a flat bat bump, just something simple. Like you said, it's like being in a car accident every single time. The body's not meant to do that. So yeah, it takes a toll on you. So the word fake, some guys are light and some guys are stiff. I was stiff. I would protect you. I have no problem with wrestling someone that was stiff, right? I had a problem like Vader that was reckless and careless and didn't care about taking care of you. I remember remember the Southern Posse?
Oh, yeah.
Rick Thames wrestled Vader and clubbed him. Must have broke his nose because he was bleeding like crazy. And in the dressing room, he was laying on the floor, and Vader come by, didn't say sorry or anything like that. Just looked at him and says, "Oh, you'll be all right," and kept on going. So I have no problem with someone being stiff. The face is valuable merchandise, so you protect that. You can hit hard in the back. You don't want to hit the kidneys, and you're protective. But even after all that, you still feel it all. Injuries, I'm definitely paying for a lot of those power bombs and whirly birds. I called Sid once and I was like, man, I just want to tell you, I think about you every morning. He said, what do you mean? I said, when I get out of bed, my body's aching. And he's like, oh man, he was like a super, super nice guy. He was cool. He was stiff and all that. He did smack me in the face once. And I told him in the back, I said, if you ever smack me in the face again, I'm going to smack you right back when you're not thinking about it in the match. Because one of the things Blackjack told me, he says, don't ever let someone smack you in the face. He said, that's disrespect. When you have Jack telling you something like that, you kind of listen to it. And he apologized. He said, oh, I'm so sorry, man. I'll never do that again. He never did. He was a great guy. But he was rough on the guys. He didn't go out and intentionally try to hurt someone. He come into the back. There's accidents that happen, okay? It's wrestling. It's a contact sport. Contact entertainment, however you want to say it. But the fact is, people get hurt, things hurt. And so when you accidentally hit someone or drop them the wrong way or whatever, he would come to the back and say, hey, are you okay, man? I'm so sorry. Like I talked about last week, Scott Norton almost broke my neck. He going up for some type of power bombs, his grip slipped and went right on my head. And he came back and he apologized, wanted to make sure I was okay and everything. I wrestled the French Canadians and I got knocked out totally. It was where they did a Russian leg sweep and a clothesline at the same time. And the big guy, he knocked me out totally in the ring, middle of WCW ring. I was gone. And he got his ass reamed by Jock. He was like, because I've wrestled him as the Mountie a lot in WCW, and he's light as a feather. You don't even, like a Bobby Eaton, like you don't even feel anything. I mean, it's like a night off when you see your name on the board against him. So, there's a million different types of wrestlers, types how they are in the ring, but the most important thing is that you're safe and you protect your opponent. So yeah, I laid everything in hard, but I always was safe with them and I never hurt anyone. No, not accidentally, maybe intentionally. But
there are receipts for other things. And again, one of the old jokes, we'll be watching the match or I'll be calling the match at ringside and be thinking, my God, they're beating the hell out of this guy. Does he owe him trans money? Does he owe him something?
Yeah,
and
that's an old saying. Oh, brother, do I owe you any money or something?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
Ricky Morton had a great line. Please start punching me for real. What do you mean? Because your working punches are killing me.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some guys that.
There's so many
usually
stories.
The worst looking punch hurts the worst.
Yeah. Looks like shit, hurts like hell. That's what I would always hear. And Jack Mulligan was a famous one. Blackjack had that real short punch, and it didn't look like much, but as his fist is going through your face, like, ow.
That's the size of his fist right there.
That's the Blackjack Mulligan's hand. And you can't do much with that. You just say sorry. Kevin Sullivan, by the way, when he came to Ring of Honor with Steve Corino, and it was amazing, and he apologized ahead of time before the match, and he says, sorry, Steve, I'm a little stiff with the spike. And Steve had been through this bloody war, tables and chairs, and the thing that hurt the worst was getting that golden spike right on top of his head and had a divot. Oh, my God. But he warned him ahead of time.
I wrestled Blackjack. You called the match, actually, at IWF. The funny story is he wrestled the hour before against, remember the Lebanese assassin, Tony Mella?
Yeah, Java
Big old
Rupe.
guy, right?
Yeah, oh
300 and
yeah.
some pounds. Jack didn't sell anything for him. Nothing. Total squash. Killed him, right? So the next hour is me against Jack. Of course, I'm Jack's boy. He's like, what do you want to do? I said, Jack, it's your match. You call it, whatever you want to do. He's like, nah, you call it. I said, Jack, you don't want me to call it because I'm going to put myself, look, I'm going to shine. He's like, just call whatever you want. So at that time, I might have been 215 pounds, 200 pounds, give or take. And I was wrestling, I don't know, maybe Dr. X or Mr. X. I had like karate pants on with a black hood. And you could tell I was smaller, extremely smaller than Blackjack
Yeah,
Mulligan.
you're half his size. I mean, well, not half. I mean, he's 330 pounds.
And 6'7". So he's a good 7 inches taller than me. So I get in there and I'm like, all right. I just started putting myself over, tackle, drop down, reverse hip toss, arm drag, drop kick, and he's bumping for me. The whole crowd's like, because the hour before they've seen him no sell for someone his size, but it was a respect thing. Jack would actually tell you before, he says, watch the tater, kid, and come way from up here, and he would just tater you with everything. But
Right.
he would tell you, watch the tater. That's his moves, tater. He shoots you off, he says, tater.
Well, that's a
For
good
real.
part. That's a good place to let's put a pin in this conversation, and we'll wrap it up for this week because we try to get you in and out with the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast. We don't want to linger around for hours. Let's do about 30 minutes, have a chat, have some fun, a good listen while you're getting back in the car, going to work, or taking the kids to school, or just having some time to goof off.
Yep.
That's what we want to do. We want to help you goof off each and every week, Casey. That's our job here in the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast.
Sir.
So we'll get back into this conversation next week, and we definitely have some more deep dives to do. We're going to have Bob Cook on an upcoming episode, having some good times with him. We'll definitely have him as our first guest and other guests as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us some topics, some things you'd like for us to touch on. I know some fans have asked for me to tell some stories about my years in Japan. I'll be happy to do that.
Nice.
Again, how it relates to in-ring, definitely. I learned so much over there. And how the culture in wrestling during that time was emblematic of some of what we may have seen in the United States during that time
Right.
as well. But Casey and I are enjoying this ride, and we hope you're enjoying it as well. Be sure to join us next week, and all the episodes are up. In case you've missed any of them, make sure you catch up and never miss an episode of the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast. For Casey Thompson, I'm Kevin Kelly, and we'll see you next time.